Hi everyone, I'm doing my presentation on reducing CO2 emissions through biogas, wind, and solar energy production. First, we have the objectives of this presentation. I'll start off with an introduction, move to the description of the three energy productions, explain some of the methods and procedures, discuss the results, and finish with a conclusion. The learning objective for this presentation is students will be able to identify how biogas, wind, and solar production impacts the reduction of the CO2 emissions and if these methods are successful. So starting off with the introduction. In this study, the impact of biogas energy, wind energy, and solar energy production is studied on the CO2 emissions in Indonesia. Indonesia is the fourth most populated nation with very high rates of urbanization. So with that being said, the increasing population has caused an increase in the country's needs. So the country has to meet the increasing demand of its people for the basic livelihoods, food, clothes, and energy. But at the same time, it has to keep a low profile for the carbon energy development as well as for the climate change. So this study presents three different sections that seek the reduction of the carbon dioxide emissions through biogas energy production, wind energy production, and solar energy production. So starting off with the first production, we have biogas energy production. So biogas is a natural non-synthetic fuel which is produced on the degradation and the decomposition of organic waste material. So using an anaerobic digestive system in a cow farm, having 7,000 cows can actually decrease global warming potential by 99%, and that's a huge amount. So the anaerobic environment is one which is oxygen free. So the waste management system must install this system at the farm that will ultimately produce the biogas and the energy for electricity. So some special role that is played by these digesters that have a unique way of converting the energy found in the organic matter of the manure into biogas. So this biogas will then be transported to a combustion turbine. And then the bonds from that methane molecules have special energy stored in them, which is then converted into the mechanical energy as it spins the turbine. And then lastly, the bond energy is converted into the mechanical energy, which actually produces electricity. So the biogas technology, it's very important in the world full of greenhouse gases as it reduces the global warming effect and it helps in the reduction of the CO2 emissions. The next production we have is the wind energy production. So this method, it replaced the energy production methods from non-renewable energy resources. This will ultimately have a positive effect on the climate as fewer amounts of greenhouse gases will actually be emitted. So this technology converts the wind energy into electricity or mechanical power of wind that is utilized to run the turbines. So this method is extremely cost effective and several barrels of oil can be used, saving non-renewable energy resources, and million tons of carbon emissions will be stopped. And it can be stated that the wind energy production helps in the reduction of that CO2 emissions. So for the last production, we have the solar energy production. So the solar energy, it's a radiant light and heat from the sun. So the solar energy can be utilized for crop drying, water heating, and many more. So this carbon dioxide emissions from a drying system uses 100 kilowatt hours per day of the electricity. And according to the data, it was noted that this procedure produces carbon dioxide gas to about 14.77 tons per year, which is a huge amount. So using the solar energy's greenhouse gas emissions, this can be used to reduce any environmental hazards to that environment. And then the solar energy is cost effective, time saving, and it producing results which also meet the international standards, and it's very efficient. So it can be concluded that the solar energy production actually aids in the reduction of that CO2 emissions. On this slide we have the methods. So as we can see, we have a first model and a second model that was used in this study. So all the variables of the study can be divided into three categories, which are dependent, independent, and control variables. So the CO2 emissions in the dependent variable, while the production of the three types of energy are actually the biogas, the wind, and the solar energy, which all represent the independent variables of this study. And then apart from those, there is a control variable that was considered by the author when using these equations, which is the energy consumption. So the measurement unit for that CO2 emissions, it has been taken as the amount of CO2 in the whole atmosphere. And then the measurement unit of all kinds of the energy productions are the biogas energy, which is represented by BE, the wind energy, which is represented by WE, and then the solar energy, which represents the SE. And these have all been taken as billion kilowatt hours. And so not only these, but there's also the same unit that was taken for the energy consumption that stands for the EC, and that is actually the only control variable of this study. So when considering all of these variables and their measurement units, the author came up with the following first model or the equation that's represented on this sheet. So as the above equation is based on the independent variables, as I just explained, there's also the additional control variable of the study that was needed to be considered, which was the energy consumption. So this falls under the second model that was generated by the author to demonstrate his practices. Next, I'll be moving on to the procedures of this study. The estimation procedures of this study was divided into three parts that includes the unit root test, the co-integration test, and the GMM estimation technique. So these tests are used in order to study the order of integration, co-integration relationships, and the significant impacts of those different variables that I explained before. So over a year, based on the amount of electricity wind is currently generating each day, wind turbines save around 6.1 million tons of carbon dioxide, which is also about 4% of Indonesia's emissions from electricity. So the role of the biogas, wind energy solutions, and the solar energy production is very essential for the economy. And for the development of an economy, the role of the energy productions are also very essential and important. So the purpose of the given study is to illustrate the reducing process of this CO2 emissions through the energy production, solar energy, and the biogas. And the results analyzed were through the two methods of the co-integration and the GMM approach. And I'll be explaining the GMM approach on the next slide. So here we're going to discuss the GMM estimation technique results. So there was in this study actually only two tables provided and no graphs, but from what I can conclude from this table is that 1% increase in the biogas, wind, and solar energy production, the amount of the CO2 emissions will increase by 21.3%, 28.5%, and 22.8% respectively according to the GMM results. And from using the GMM approach and those results, we get to the results of the whole case study. So this study and the findings actually illustrate the solar energy as well as the wind energy solutions that helps in the reduction of the CO2 emissions, which is very significant. So the results provide a significant relationship for the use of the solar energy and the CO2 emissions. So this study demonstrates the solar power that can help in the reduction of the CO2 emissions, mainly by being a clean and renewable source of the energy. So the solar power, it's not independent on burning the fossil fuels or any other products, but instead it uses electrons that are captured from the sun's energy for energy creation. And then also this study demonstrates the wind turbines that can reduce the CO2 emissions by using the wind to produce energy, and then this has fewer effects on the environment than many of the other energy sources. So wind turbines do not release that emissions that can pollute the air or the water, and they do not require water for cooling. So these wind turbines may also reduce the amount of the electricity generated from those fossil fuels, which then results in the lower total air pollution and carbon dioxide emissions. So to conclude that whole study is that the results and finding examined that the CO2 emissions can be reduced in many ways. However, from studying in this case study, wind energy, solar energy, and energy productions are the most significant ones. So now to wrap that whole case study up, we're going to move on to the conclusions. So the potential of the advanced and renewable energy technologies is very promising in the long-term CO2 emissions process and what the future is going to hold. So the purpose of this study is to then analyze the role of that wind, solar, and the biogas in the reducing the CO2 emissions through the role of the energy consumption, which was the control variable. So as explained in the above slides of the methods, how those control variables were used to find the energy consumption in the atmosphere. So using that GMM time series approach was very useful, and it was used to discuss the results and the findings. So the results indicated that the solar energy and the energy production sources and the use of the wind energy projects actually helped in the reduction of the carbon emissions. So using that GMM approach actually provided the solution for the solar and the wind to be the leading factors in reducing that carbon emissions. So this was indicated that the biogas, the wind, and the solar energy production actually helped in reducing the CO2 emissions in Indonesia. So the methods were very successful and will continue to be used in the future. Thank you guys so much for your time.